The courtroom was tense before the hearing even began, and Tom Homan, former acting ICE director, stood with his usual cold confidence, arms crossed as he glanced around the chamber, eyes locking on the press gallery where cameras weren't allowed but where every journalist present would make sure this moment became national news within the hour. Because this wasn't just any hearing, it was the culmination of months of political pressure, legal wrangling, and public protests, and at the center of it all stood Judge James Boasberg, a man known for his measured demeanor but also his absolute intolerance for anyone who disrespected the rule of law. And as the proceedings commenced, Boasberg's tone was firm but professional, reciting the charges being considered: obstruction, contempt of court, and potential perjury tied to testimony Homan had delivered during a congressional oversight inquiry related to detention practices and the destruction of key internal memos. And Homan didn't flinch, even smirking at one point as if the entire thing was a waste of his time. But Boasberg noticed, and that moment of arrogance would become the trigger for what followed, because as the courtroom settled, Boasberg began to speak not just as a judge but as a citizen, his voice tightening with controlled fury as he cited specific dates where Homan had defied subpoenas, delayed document releases, and authorized actions that directly contradicted standing legal orders, and the air became heavier with every word, especially when Boasberg asked Homan directly if he still stood by statements he made under oath 3 months prior in which he denied knowledge of a now-confirmed operation that had transferred detainees between private facilities to evade legal oversight, and Homan, clearly growing irritated, muttered something under his breath about activist judges, a phrase that hung in the air like smoke, and Boasberg, no longer willing to tolerate the performance, leaned forward and addressed him in a voice that cut through the courtroom like a blade, saying, "Mr. Homan, in this court, your badge does not shield you from the truth," and that one sentence flipped the entire room into dead silence, as reporters furiously scribbled and the prosecution team exchanged glances, sensing the shift in tone had turned into something irreversible, and before Homan could react, Boasberg cited an internal order to remand him into custody for willful contempt, causing an audible gasp from spectators as 2 U.S. Marshals approached, and while Homan tried to argue, his voice rising into frustrated disbelief, Boasberg ordered him silenced, stating clearly that the time for arguments was over and that enforcement of the law did not exclude the enforcers themselves, and within minutes, Homan's wrists were in cuffs, his expression frozen between rage and disbelief as he was escorted out, and chaos followed, flash reports hitting every media outlet, politicians taking sides instantly, some hailing Boasberg as a defender of justice, others branding the moment a political hit job, and while Homan's legal team scrambled for an emergency appeal, the real story had already embedded itself into public memory, a powerful figure brought to heel not with shouting, but with judicial precision, and behind the scenes, federal agencies began quietly reviewing years of internal policies tied to immigration enforcement, spurred by the ripple effects of that courtroom showdown, and within days, Boasberg's quote, "Your badge does not shield you from the truth," was etched onto headlines, protest signs, and legal blogs, becoming a symbolic line in the sand for accountability. And though Homan would later be released on bond, his fall from grace was irreversible, as video of his arrest replayed across social media and news segments worldwide, a stark reminder that in a nation of laws, not even the enforcers are above the courtroom's reach. The fallout from Tom Homan's arrest unfolded at a blistering pace, with legal commentators split down ideological lines, some calling it an overdue reckoning, others framing it as a symbolic assault on law enforcement institutions. But regardless of the noise, Judge Boasberg remained silent, declining interviews, refusing to issue public statements, and instead allowing his ruling, and the video of Homan being led out in cuffs, to speak for itself. And behind closed doors, federal prosecutors began convening a grand jury to determine whether to pursue formal criminal charges based on the evidence Boasberg had reviewed in chambers, evidence that included encrypted messages, chain of command directives, and unredacted memos that painted a disturbing picture of operational misconduct and blatant disregard for legal orders. And while Homan's legal team hit every cable news network decrying the incident as judicial overreach and political theater, Boasberg's reputation insulated him from the accusations because even longtime critics admitted he was not known for theatrics. He was known for precision, for restraint, for delivering rulings with the kind of care that left little room for misinterpretation. And so when he convened an emergency bench session just 4 days after the arrest to clarify the scope of Homan's violations, legal observers knew something major was unfolding, and it did. In a rare move, Boasberg ordered the partial unsealing of classified court records, making public a document that showed Homan had greenlit internal protocols that effectively allowed ICE officials to bypass habeas corpus filings by moving detainees between jurisdictions faster than court orders could reach them, and that revelation sent shockwaves across legal, political, and civil rights communities, because it confirmed what advocacy groups had long suspected but never proven, that there was a coordinated effort to obstruct judicial review. And suddenly, Homan wasn't just the face of controversy, he was the center of a potential criminal conspiracy. And as Boasberg read from the bench, emphasizing that operational efficiency cannot be used as a veil for constitutional evasion, the mood in the courtroom turned once again, with even conservative-leaning legal analysts forced to acknowledge that the facts were damning. And while Homan sat in custody preparing for his preliminary defense, agents from the DOJ's Office of the Inspector General quietly began interviews with other officials who had once stood beside him, and some flipped, offering corroboration in exchange for immunity, giving prosecutors the leverage they needed to build a wider net of indictments. And in the days that followed, several ICE regional directors were subpoenaed, emails were leaked, and suddenly the case wasn't just about Homan's personal choices, it was about a culture of impunity within a system that had long operated in the shadows of federal oversight. And Boasberg, refusing to let the spectacle dominate the process, issued a statement through court channels urging the public to focus not on the man, but on the method, and whether it aligns with the Constitution we all serve. And those words became their own viral quote, plastered on headlines and cable news tickers, giving the nation a new lens through which to view the controversy. And while Homan's supporters called it a witch hunt, even some of his allies began distancing themselves, issuing carefully worded statements about the importance of due process. And as the trial date loomed, Washington, D.C. braced for a media circus, with barricades already being discussed around the courthouse and federal agents coordinating with local police to manage the expected protests. And meanwhile, Boasberg's chambers remained calm, his staff instructed to avoid public comment, his docket full but his demeanor unchanged, because the judge at the center of it all knew that if the justice system was going to defend itself, it couldn't be loud, it had to be thorough, deliberate, and unshakable. And with the eyes of the country upon him, that's exactly what he intended to be.